Hermione Granger and the Chamber of Secrets. Chapter 3. At Flourish and Blotts. With every kilometer they drove, Hermione grew more and more excited. The Grangers were on their way to London. At Hermione's insistence, they had decided to stay at the historic Piccadilly Hotel near the heart of Piccadilly Circus. Hermione, of course, had done as much research as she possibly could before settling on the historic hotel, in between her Latin study, of course. Built in 1908 as a five-star luxury hotel, architect Richard Norman Shaw designed the Piccadilly Hotel with 17th century English Palladian architecture influences and full of Edwardian charm. Surprisingly, even though the hotel was designed to have 300 bedrooms, multiple and massive restaurants, three basement floors up to 40 feet below ground level, four Masonic temples, a grill room, and a great deal of storage, the construction of the hotel only took 18 months to be completed. When the hotel first opened, it boasted a staff of 650 and had its own generator which supplied electricity to the whole hotel. King George V was a fan of the hotel and stayed there on multiple occasions, even though Buckingham Palace was just a stone's throw away. A few short years prior to the Grangers' visit, Le Méridien, part of Air France, purchased the hotel and modernized it, being mindful of maintaining the Edwardian charm. Hermione absolutely loved the history of the hotel, and even more, that hotel was right in the middle of all the excitement of Piccadilly Circus. The lights, the sounds, the smells, it was all so much more exciting than Leavenham. It wasn't perhaps as exciting as experiencing Diagon Alley for the first time, but it came very, very close. Hermione smiled as her mind flashed back to arriving in Diagon Alley with her parents that fateful first trip. Professor McGonagall had accompanied the Grangers through the Flu network, a series of magical passageways using fireplaces which were interconnected throughout the wizarding world. As they stepped out into the little shopping village, Hermione had been completely overwhelmed with the multitude of witches and wizards filling its cobblestone streets. There were short witches and wizards, tall ones, fat ones, skinny ones. They were dressed in robes of every color imaginable. There were a plethora of sights, sounds, and smells that overwhelmed Hermione and her family in a good way. Hermione found it difficult to pay attention to anything Professor McGonagall was saying because she was so busy looking at everyone and everything. The Grangers ended up staying all weekend at Diagon Alley, exploring the magical shops and restaurants. After checking in at the charming and expensive front desk of the Piccadilly Hotel, the Grangers rode the lifts to their room. It was small yet elegant, decorated with rich mahogany wood and deep burgundy accents. Bert threw his tattered duffel bag to the floor and jumped onto the lush bed. "Keep time!" he exclaimed, and put the crook of his elbow over his eyes to shield them from the early afternoon sun streaming in the window. "Dad!" Hermione whined and grabbed his arms. "No, we absolutely have no time to take a nap. We have a schedule, and we're already 7 minutes behind." Bert chuckled. "I was only joking," he said, getting off the bed and following Hermione to the door. "You were not joking," Mary whispered with a grin as Bert passed her. He put his fingers to his lips and winked. "For the love of all things magical, don't tell her that," he whispered back. Even in the afternoon light, the brightness of the neon signs seemed to dance and bounce off the Grangers' faces. The first stop was, of course, to see the historic Coca-Cola sign, which had been there since 1954. Next, the family walked over to Shaftesbury Avenue Memorial Statue, erected in 1892-1893 to commemorate the philanthropic works of Lord Shaftesbury. Hermione rattled off the history of the sites to her eager parents. Bert couldn't help but smile. Hermione had actually learned more about the historical sites than he and Mary had. Soon it was time to grab a bite to eat before the show. The Grangers dodged tourists left and right and slowly made their way to a quaint little pub away from the hustle and bustle of the heart of Piccadilly Circus. Bloody hell, now I know where the term "it's a Piccadilly Circus" comes from, exclaimed Bert in reference to the seemingly never endless stream of people. Language, said Mary. Sorry, love, but it's true, Bert said. If there were ever a time to say bloody hell, it's when you're surrounded by a million people. I highly doubt it was a million people, Hermione said. I was being sarcastic, Bert said, looking over the menu at his doctor. It couldn't have been more than 500,000. Hermione started to open her mouth to object, but saw the shimmery glint of mischief in his father's eye and realized he was still joking. Aha, she said dryly. Very funny. Your poor patients having to listen to this drivel without any way to tell you how to stop. Marilyn Dealey spat out her water as she burst out laughing. Bert's jaw dropped. Someone's got quite cheeky at school, didn't she? He said, trying desperately not to laugh. Quite, Hermione said with a huge grin. Oh, Dad, you never did tell me. Did you ever finish Les Miserables? Bert shifted in the dark mahogany pub chair. I got through most of it, he said. What is this pick on Daddy Day? Hermione laughed. How much is most of it? About half, Bert said, setting his jaw indignantly. But don't forget, I've already read it before. This was just a refresher course. Instead of letting the conversation continue, Mary spoke up. I'm curious to see if whoever plays Jean Valjean can live up to Colm Wilkinson. Bert looked at her with a quizzical look. Hermione piped up. Colm Wilkinson was the original West End actor to play Jean Valjean. He's the only one. He's the one who is on our cast recording. He's even better, came a voice. Grangers looked up to see their smiling waitress with a tray full of food. I got to see the show a month ago, she said. You're going to love it. First time? Hermione nodded enthusiastically as the red-headed waitress doled out their food. I've read the book, and I'm very curious to see how close it is, she said as she moved her silverware out of the way for the waitress. Marius is definitely better in the musical, the waitress said with a wink. Hermione gasped. She had been anticipating meeting someone else who had read the book as well. In the book, he seemed somewhat selfish. In the musical, he is much nicer. You'll definitely be rooting for him towards the end. Enjoy! The waitress gave Hermione another wink and walked back to the kitchen. The Grangers finished their meal in excited anticipation. Hermione could barely taste her shepherd's pie, she was eating it so quickly. The show didn't start for another hour, but Hermione couldn't wait to get into the theater and start the experience, and to see if the waitress was right about Marius. Marius, in the novel, was a young man who defied his rich, privileged family to fight for the French Revolution. Hermione too felt he could be quite selfish and entitled throughout the book. As they stepped inside the historic and massive red brick palace theater, the Grangers were met with pure opulence. The lavish lobby was filled with people just as excited as they were. The grand staircase grew before them, and the sparkling chandeliers cast a cascade of dancing lights throughout the lobby. Hermione was mesmerized by the Edwardian architecture and enamored of the history contained within it. As the usher took the Grangers to their seats in the balcony, Hermione marveled at the stunning layout of the theater. There couldn't possibly be a bad seat in this house. Her excitement was bubbling over, and she could hardly sit still. As the lights dimmed to black, however, Hermione turned to stone. The first few notes of Les Miserables drifted up over the balcony, and Hermione was immediately transported, as if by magic, to the French Revolution. Brava! Brava! Hermione bellowed enthusiastically, standing up with the rest of the audience as the cast took their bows. As the house lights brightened, Hermione turned to her parents. Can we go to the stage door, please? Sure, Mary said loudly, to be heard over the thunderous applause. The Grangers snaked their way through the maze of people, turning this way and that. They finally found themselves outside the theater. This way, said Hermione, as she led them to the nondescript side door of the theater. It was painted a candy apple red color, though the paint was flecking off in places to reveal black paint. A small crowd had already formed, but not nearly as many as Hermione had thought there'd be. That was exquisite, she said, her breath catching slightly in her throat. That waitress was right. Marius was perfect. So brave, so loyal. Just as the words left her mouth, the stage door opened and out walked the actor who played Marius. His wavy blonde hair flopped over on his head, and his crystal clear blue eyes seemed to sparkle in the streetlights. Finnegan. It couldn't be. With a second glance, Hermione could tell it wasn't actually Finnegan, but the actor could have definitely been his twin. He glanced at the crowd, and his eyes found Hermione's. She gasped and was, for one of the very first times in her life, rendered speechless. Her whole body froze as he made his way down the line towards the Grangers, signing autographs as he went. She could feel her heart fluttering as he got near. The telltale signs of her anxiety were bubbling to the surface, but instead of taking a mile a minute, not a single fact or figure could come to mind. It was a little frightening, but oddly calming in a way. Hermione's head never really stopped. As it got to Hermione, Mary had to nudge her daughter to get her to put out her playbill for the actor to sign. Did you enjoy the show? He asked. Hermione barely nodded. It was absolutely stunning, Mary said. I think we can all agree to that. Mary nodded towards Hermione, who just nodded again. The actor knelt down to Hermione's level and smiled as he pulled her playbill out of her hand. So you liked it, huh? He said with a sparkling smile. What was your favorite part? Everything, she squeaked. It was so much better than the book. You read the book, did you? The man said with surprise. All of it? You're my new hero. They had us ready to prepare for the show. It was a beast to get through, yeah? You must be really smart. Hermione's face flushed as red as the stage door. His hands brushed hers as he handed back the playbill, and Hermione felt an electric pulse vibrate through her hand. Best in class, Bert said, beaming. Dad, Hermione hissed, the embarrassment bringing tears to her eyes. That's great, the actor said, not noticing or not acknowledging her embarrassment. Congratulations. Keep at it, yeah? We need more smart people like you in the world. Hermione nodded, and the actor gave her one last wink before moving down the line to the rest of the theater goers, waiting for his autograph. The Grangers got a few more signatures on their playbill, but Hermione couldn't care less. She was completely enamored with the actor who played Marius. In her mind, she imagined him, or Finnegan, she couldn't tell, singing to her as he had to the character of Cosette, his love, in the show. She didn't think of how much she missed Hogwarts the whole way back to the hotel. Hermione's night was filled with dreams of the lyrical musings of a golden-haired angel. Not once did she have a nightmare about using the wrong charm on her exams or forgetting how to perform a spell when confronted with he who must not be named, both of which had been a near nightly occurrence since she returned home from Hogwarts. Hermione woke up more refreshed than she had quite possibly have ever been in her life. The only slightly negative thing was that she hadn't seen or heard an owl while she had been in London, which meant she still hadn't received her copy of Magical Me. Perhaps it was the good night's sleep. Hermione wasn't too upset over it. In fact, she had an idea. A brilliant one, if she said so. Good morning, she said as she rolled out of bed into the small sitting area where Bert and Mary were sitting. I know we have a full day planned, but I was hoping we could take a quick trip to Diagon Alley this morning so I could get a book for school. Saying the Gilderoy Lockhart book was for school was a bit of a stretch, but technically, it was a book she wanted to read to connect with a future student, so Hermione could justify the white lie. Knowing you, a trip to the bookstore in Diagon Alley will never be quick, said Mary. Nor it will be cheap, added Bert with a chuckle. I promise, just one book, and then we can come back here to London and do everything on our list. Okay, I suppose we could pop over there quickly, said Mary. But how will we get there, if not through the fireplace? The Leaky Cauldron is just over on Charing Cross, right by the Palace Theatre, actually, and that is where we can access Diagon Alley from. Well, I guess that settles things, Bert said, pulling out his weathered leather wallet and looking inside. We may have to stop at the Muggle Bank on the way there, though. Hermione didn't even hear him. She was too excited to go back to the wizarding world, even if just for a little bit. As they passed the Palace Theatre, Hermione couldn't help herself but constantly scan the crowd for the actor who played Marius. His real name was Eddie Rouse, but Hermione much preferred the name Marius or Finnegan over a boring name like Eddie. Much to her dismay, she didn't see him milling about the red brick facade. The Grangers turned right onto Charing Cross Road from Shaftesbury Avenue and walked through the crowds to a very nondescript, seemingly broken down shop Hermione knew to be the Leaky Cauldron. As they walked, Hermione rattled off the history. Did you know that when the London city planners decided to create Charing Cross Road, the initial plan was to demolish all of the buildings already established, including the Leaky Cauldron? Our Minister of Magic at the time, Faris Pavin, thought it was a lost cause. However, hundreds of wizards rallied to save the Leaky Cauldron and convinced Minister Spavin to perform memory charms on the planners so they would build the road next to the Leaky Cauldron instead of on top of it. Fascinating, isn't it? Ah, here it is. Hermione stopped and looked up at the rusty, deteriorating sign above her head. Right before her eyes, she watched it transform into the Leaky Cauldron sign. Seeing her parents' apprehension to enter the dingy facade wedged between a Muggle record store and bookshop made her pause. She had forgotten that they didn't see what she did. Due to the Statute of Secrecy in 1692, the Leaky Cauldron was subjected to a complete makeover to make it unappealing to Muggles. That's why it looks like this to you both. We can't have random Muggles entering Diagon Alley, can we? It's perfectly safe, believe me. We've already been there before, remember? We just entered it from the Diagon Alley side. You'll see. Come on then. Bert and Mary exchanged worried looks before following Hermione into the grimy building. Even before Hermione's eyes adjusted to the darkness of the Leaky Cauldron, Hermione could smell the magic soaked within the walls. It was a bizarre mixture of new parchment, butterscotch, and a hint of rain that Hermione had never smelled anywhere else in the Muggle world. As soon as she smelled it, she knew she was home. Giving a wave to Tom, the barkeep, Hermione led her parents through the dark and shabby pub area, through the courtyard, and out into Diagon Alley. The hustle and bustle were not unsimilar to that of Piccadilly Circus, but there were a lot more interestingly dressed people. Trying desperately to stay true to her word to only go to the bookstore and back, Hermione turned north out of the Leaky Cauldron's courtyard onto Diagon Alley towards Flourish and Blotts, the premier wizarding bookstore. She had to avert her eyes as she passed Scribulus, the stationery store, because she loved perusing the different quills and parchments and didn't want to be tempted. Nonetheless, she had one thing on her mind: Gilderoy Lockhart's book. The weathered brass bell sprinkled its sound as Hermione opened the heavy door to Flourish and Blotts. From floor to ceiling, all Hermione could see were piles and stacks of books. Leather books, paper books, furry books. Flourish and Blotts seemed to have every book imaginable. It wasn't nearly as crowded as it was when Hermione last visited, with a back-to-school crowd. But there was a small group of people huddled around the medium-sized display. Hermione craned her neck to see around the witches huddled together to see what the excitement was. She gasped. There, larger than life, on the cover of about 30 books, displayed into a pyramid shape, was the perfect combination of Marius and Finnegan. Magical Me by Gilderoy Lockhart had a gilded frame on its dark purple cover. Inside the frame, Mr. Lockhart himself was smiling back, seemingly directly at Hermione, posing in different positions. His bright blue eyes and floppy golden hair glittered in the flashbulbs. Hermione's heart skipped a bit. The resemblance to Marius and Finnegan was uncanny. She squeezed her way through the group of witches and snatched the first copy she could reach. Ducking underneath a particularly plump witch in scarlet robes, Hermione was able to get back to where her parents were standing. "That's the book you need for school, huh?" Mary asked with a hint of suspicion in her voice. "I thought it would be a textbook." It is," Hermione said slowly, trying to figure out how to answer. "Well, kind of. It's more for a book club, I mean, rather than a class." "Oh, that sounds lovely," Mary exclaimed, all suspicion gone from her voice. "I was in quite a few book clubs when I was in school. Made some of my best friends in those. You know my friends Connie and Samantha? We met in book club." "Oh, yes, I remember them," Hermione said almost automatically. She was only half listening to her mother because she was too busy studying Gilderoy Lockhart on the cover. The moving portrait was so crisp and clear. She could make out every perfectly placed hair on his perfect head. She absent-mindedly ran her finger over the cover. "So how much is that then?" asked Bert, snapping Hermione out of her trance. "I'm going to have to go to exchange some money, I think." "Oh, no, you don't have to, Dad," Hermione said. "I already prepaid. I just have to tell them I'm here to pick it up." She smiled at him and bounced over to the counter. A harried assistant clerk was looking warily over to the group of women around the Gilderoy Lockhart display and didn't notice Hermione approaching. Hermione, not wanting to appear rude, just stood in silence and tried to will the assistant to look at her with her mind. After about a minute, Hermione quietly cleared her throat. Nothing. Hermione tried again. Nothing again. She was starting to get anxious. She didn't want to be a bother and certainly didn't want to interrupt what she knew was probably a rare moment of downtime for the assistant, but she also didn't want to keep her parents waiting for more than was necessary. Hermione decided to try clearing her throat one more time. Unfortunately, she tried to swallow at the exact same time and started coughing uncontrollably, which certainly got the attention of the assistant immediately. "All right, love?" she asked with a slightly concerned look on her face. Hermione tried to reply but couldn't stop coughing. Bert and Mary rushed over and started hitting Hermione upon the back to try and help her breathe. The assistant looked horrified and rushed over with her wand. "What on earth are you doing to her? Stop it!" she yelled, and then pointing the wand at Hermione. "Anapneo!" she cried, and orange sparks shot out of her wand towards Hermione's throat. Immediately, Hermione felt her throat open up and gulp the air. Finally, she could breathe. Are you okay? The assistant asked wearily. Yes, thank you, Hermione replied, her voice still shaky. And what on earth were you doing that for? The assistant turned her attention towards the Grangers. Hitting the poor girl as she was choking. Do you know these two, love? I should jinx them, I should. No, exclaimed Hermione. I mean, yes, I know them. They're my parents. They're muggles. That's what we do when people are choking. Realization crossed the assistant's face before morphing into a slight scowl Hermione almost didn't catch. Makes no sense to hit someone who's choking. Muggles aren't the brightest, are they? Hermione bristled slightly. The clerk must surely be joking. Regardless, she ignored the statement. Anyway, she started, hoping the clerk took notice of the changing subject. I ordered this book by Owl, but haven't received it yet, so I thought to save an owl another trip. I just come to pick it up while my family was in London. That is, if it's not a huge inconvenience to you. Hermione hoped the clerk would recognize the sarcasm. Oh, it's no inconvenience at all, the assistant said with a flick of her wand. From behind the counter, a wrapped brown box filled with forms flew up. What's the name of the order? I was going to get to these today or tomorrow, just didn't get around to it. Granger, Hermione Granger. Accio Granger order form, said the clerk with another flick of her wand. A slip of paper near the bottom of the box flew upwards into the clerk's hand. Unfortunately, all of the papers that had rested on top of that paper flew up as well and showered the clerk counter and Granger's. Found it, she said dismally, holding up the form in the air while looking down at the mess that had been made. Here, let me help you with these, Hermione said and dropped to the floor to start collecting the forms littering the ground. You sure you're not a muggle too, dear? There's this thing called magic, you know, said the clerk with more than a hint of reproach before switching her wand again. Poliglio, she said, and all of the order forms collected into a neat stack on the counter. No. No, I'm going in my second year at Hogwarts, Hermione said sternly. She certainly wasn't worried about being a bother anymore, nor was she uncertain of the assistant's true feelings about her and her family. I just can't do magic since I'm underage. Right, the clerk said, but wasn't very convincing. So are we good then? Hermione asked. She wanted to leave the bookstore as soon as possible. Never having experienced any sort of mean-spiritedness like this before in the wizarding world, Hermione didn't want to continue to feel the way the clerk was making her feel and have it ruin her trip to the wizarding world. Yes, all set. Do you want a bag for that? The clerk said, but Hermione was already on her way out of the store. The Grangers had a delightful day, taking in the London sights and sounds, but Hermione couldn't shake a feeling of profound sadness. Flourish and Blotts was her happy place, within her happy place of the wizarding world, the best of the best, so to speak. She had always feared she'd feel out of place in the wizarding world for being a Muggle-born, but had never experienced it fully until the interaction with the clerk. Hermione did her best, however, to forget the altercation and focus on the beautiful history of London. She was also ashamed to admit it. She was also ashamed to admit it also helped to sneak a peek at Gilderoy Lockhart's smiling face on the cover of Magical Me every once in a while as well. She knew she was being as irrational as Lavender Brown was when it came to an infatuation with boys, but she couldn't help herself. Besides, it seemed like all of the witches in London were obsessed with Gilderoy Lockhart, and, seeing as Hermione was a witch, she should be obsessed as well. When she was much, much younger, a whole year ago, Hermione used to give her anxiety a nickname, word vomit. Whenever her anxiety would rise up, rattling off facts and figures was the only thing to calm her. The monotonous relay of facts made her concentrate on something other than the anxiety. Hermione had been working on keeping her mouth closed during these anxiety attacks and focusing on her breathing instead. It helped a bit, especially today after the encounter at Flourish and Blotts. Mary, Bert, and Hermione exhaustedly crawled through their hotel room door around 8:30 that evening. Hermione was quite sure she had never walked so much in her life. She flopped down on her bed and pulled her book out of her bag as her parents took turns washing the city grime off in the shower. If she had to wait her turn for the shower, she could at least start reading her book. The minute she opened the book, Hermione was transported into the wizarding world of Gilderoy Lockhart. A herd of wild dragons couldn't have pulled Hermione away from losing herself within the pages. All of her anxiety and sadness disappeared within the pages and photos of one of the bravest wizards Hermione had ever read about. Just as Marius had gallantly stood up for what was right and fought for the resistance, and just as Finnegan always had a highly entertaining story to brighten Hermione's lonely days, Gilderoy Lockhart fought against the dark arts and completely entranced her with his captivating narrative. An honorary member of the Ministry of Magic's Dark Force Defense League, Lockhart seemed to be able to defeat all things evil, from trolls, which Hermione knew firsthand were tricky creatures to fight, to vampires. He conquered them all. He was invincible. Hermione highly doubted Gilderoy Lockhart would ever let some random bookstore clerk bother him. No wonder he was so popular amongst witches everywhere. Hermione was already halfway through the book when her mom interrupted her. Shower's all yours, she said. How's the book? Brilliant, Hermione said with a huge smile, and practically ran into the bathroom to shower as quickly as possible so she could continue with all of the other witches across the countryside, reading all about the bravery and intelligence of Gilderoy Lockhart. The Grangers had been home in Lavenham for a few weeks after their trip to London, and Hermione finally finished her 10th reread of Magical Me. She celebrated the milestone by decorating her room with lilac streamers, Gilderoy's favorite color, and had a large helping of treacle tarts, his favorite food. Reading Gilderoy's magical adventures successfully kept Hermione tied to the wizarding world all summer. Every time she missed her friends or the magic of Hogwarts, she just had to read a chapter, and she felt closer to them, because they were probably doing the same, to be honest. His bravery and intelligence were something Hermione could strive to achieve in the coming year at Hogwarts, and she fully intended on working doubly as hard to do so. Corresponding with Ginny Weasley had been delightful as well. She desperately missed Ron and Harry, but being pen pals with his sister was the next best thing. Ginny was delightfully funny and sarcastic, especially for a newly 11-year-old. She'd celebrated her birthday in August. They talked about all kinds of things, especially Gilderoy Lockhart and the upcoming year at Hogwarts. Their most recent conversation settled around Ron and how dissimilar Ginny thought he was to Gilderoy Lockhart, but then diverged into some troubling news. Honestly, the Pratt cried like a baby, and I hardly even did anything to him. Can you imagine? I doubt Gilderoy Lockhart has ever cried in his life, even when he was captured by the trolls in the wilds of Stockton-on-Tees. He's just so brave, just like you and Harry were when you were attacked by the troll last year. I'd imagine Harry is a lot like Gilderoy. Would you agree? Speaking of Harry, I heard Ron talking to Fred and George about breaking him out of his aunt and uncle's house, since no one has heard from him yet this summer, and then bringing him here tonight. Have you heard anything? Did you get Ron's letter yet? He sent it with Errol a day or two ago when they were planning it. If not, You should be receiving it today. I suppose I'll find out tomorrow morning if they went through with it. I have to be honest, I'm very nervous to really meet Harry. I know I met him briefly on platform 9 3/4 last year, but Hermione didn't even finish reading Ginny's letter. She was so worried and, quite frankly, enraged that Ron would do something so stupid. Even if Harry was potentially in danger, breaking him out of his aunt and uncle's house was reckless, dangerous, and probably illegal in the Muggle world. Ron and his brothers never thought things through. They immediately went for the easiest plan, not the smartest plan. She went to her room and grabbed the nearest parchment and quill. This was too serious to even boot up the computer for. Her mind was going so fast she was afraid the computer wouldn't be able to catch up. Dear Ron and Harry, if you're there, I hope everything went all right and that Harry is okay and that you didn't do anything illegal to get him out, Ron, because that would get Harry into trouble too. I've been really worried, and if Harry is all right, will you please let me know at once? There was a sudden bang on the window. Hermione gasped and looked up. There was nothing there. Hermione crept over to the window and looked down. Errol, the Weasley's old owl, was there laying on the ground, completely stunned. Beside him lay a crumpled up envelope. Hermione rushed outside and grabbed them both. By the time she had come back inside, Errol was thankfully starting to stir. Hermione shook her head in disgust before quickly adding to the letter. But perhaps it would be better if you used a different owl, because I think another delivery might finish this one off. Hermione stopped again to open Ron's letter. The grayish envelope was creased and wrinkled as if Ron had balled it up multiple times before giving it to poor Errol. Hermione unfurled the corner and slipped her finger inside to rip the seal. Hermione, Fred, George, and I are going to break Harry out of prison and bring him here to the Burrow. Just thought you would want to know. Ron. P.S. That's 26 words. You're welcome. Hermione groaned, anger flushing over her. The nerve of that boy! How dare he try to make a joke at a time like this? She took a deep breath and swept the quill back and forth against her chin, trying to calm down. There was a task at hand. She knew that if she came on too strong, Ron wouldn't tell her what happened. Finally, she put the quill back to the parchment. I'm very busy with schoolwork, of course, and we're going to London next Wednesday to buy my new books. Why don't we meet in Diagon Alley? Let me know what's happening as soon as you can. Love from Hermione. That seemed to cover all the bases. Hermione gave the letter one more look before stuffing it in an envelope. On the front of the envelope, she wrote, Ron, in large, swoopy capital letters that she hoped would push him to open it immediately. Hermione paused. Ron wasn't the most astute man she knew. She added the words, Open this immediately, Ronald, on the bottom of the envelope. It took Errol a few hours to recover from his flight. Hermione still felt guilty making the poor bird fly back to the burrow, but there was nothing much she could do. As Errol flew erratically through the sky, Hermione sighed and tried to focus on an 11th reread of Magical Me, instead of whatever bone-headed plan was probably falling apart over in little winging at Harry's aunt and uncle's house.